I'm gonna try to see if I can avoid.
Okay.
Let's all find our seats because we're about to start at 5:30. Okay, calling the meeting of the South Maui Community Plan Advisory Committee to order at 5:31 p.m. And can we start with a roll call?
Thank you, Chair. Chair Rob Weltman, Vice Chair Daniel Kanahele. Thank you. Tova Callender. Okay. Everett Dowling. Okay. I saw him. Okay. Okay. Lehua Huddleston Hapoka is excused. Vernon Kalanikau. There you are. Okay. Randall Leach. Not here yet. Mike Moran. Here you are. Okay. Cody Nemeth. There you are. Wayne Nishiki, you're very bright and early. Kyoki Felton, thank you. Jennifer Sullivan is excused and Brian Ward is excused. And member Everett Dowling is walking into the room right now. Okay, so thank you.
So we have quorum, but it's a shame that we're missing so many people. This is the least we got so far. Okay. Hindi na may lalo kung odalo ako kayo ulo no pata odalo no mai hama hindi na may no kato okay kitana odalo kadano mai me kada hole ho mai na na ka ko ya ine kayo pidani ko pono ana ikagai oh sounds wrong Kita ni kamalama ana navahi kukuna na navahi ana o maui hama. Kono mua kako hope kuka piriane na ikama kuda kevin na ikama hana no kamalama ana kawai mai uka ai kai. Let's see. Okay, so we are welcoming, we're welcoming Tanya Gregg, Lee, and Ka'onohi Lee to talk to us about what we can do to preserve and steward our Vahipupuna and our Vahipana of South Maui. Welcome. Actually, before you start, I just want to let the procedure here is going to be, we will hear these presentations, and then after that there will be public testimony, and then public testimony will be closed, and then there will be questions and discussion from the committee members to Tanya and Ka'onohi if they're able to stay. And then after that we will go into our committee deliberations. Thank you.
Aloha. Hello, my name is Tanya Gregg. I am an archaeologist by trade. Yes. Sorry, I feel like I'm at karaoke. I am an archaeologist by trade. I live in K'Lepo, so off of Kulaniha Ko'ikoch, and my kupuna are from Honua Ulan. So I have generational and living ties to the area that is covered by the South Maui Community Plan.
Aloha mai ka ko. My name is Ka'onohi Lee. I was born in Mo'oloa, raised in Mo'oloa, which is part of Honou'ulamoku. I now live in Kahului. However, we do still have kuleana property in Ka'eo. So, on with our presentation. The way we decided to do this presentation is to address I have a cold, so please bear with me. To kind of get an idea of what the concept of Vahipupuna means, because it means different things to different people. So for us here in Honou'ula, it's traditional Hawaiian land management and allocation. So in looking at the map, I should let my daughter do this because she can see better. So one of the things that we wanted to know is, okay, how do we approach this? How is it possible, or give some insight or maybe some planning tools to the question about how to maybe integrate approach through Hawaiian mindset. But I think first, and I think you've seen this all before, and I'm probably reiterating what you already know, but I wanted to go through it a little bit anyway. So looking at traditional Hawaiian land management and allocation, right? So this is a little rough to see, but there's some red squiggly lines all along the coastline there that is basically the coverage for the South Maui Community Plan. And I put it up against this 1885 map. So this map was developed by FS Dodge in and around the time of the Mahele, or at the closure of the Mahele when all of the surveys came together. The Mahele being, I think, Klekoa went through the Mahele Aina, where the Ahupua'a were defined, the boundaries as they were known at that time were put on a map. And you could truly see this Mauka to Makai relationship between the coast and the Mauka regions. And what is striking from all aspects of land management, and the challenge I think that this community plan has, is that this community plan is focused right along the coastline of Honua Ulamoku, Kulamoku, Waikapu Ahupua'a, and Ukumehame Ahupua'a, right? So there are a total of 4 traditional land management areas that is covered by the South Maui Community Plan area, right? And so the challenge is potentially that I think that you all have been probably grappling with when it comes to watershed, when it comes to wetland, is how do we care for those things? And so we're going to challenge you to also think about these Malka regions. And is there a way in your community plan so that we can plan adequately for the Makai regions and integrate the wisdom of our kupuna and their land management system? Is there a way to integrate a country or make statements or any kind of insight into the upcountry plan, into the Wailuku plan, which is covered in Waikapu Aupua, into the West Maui plan, which is covered by Ukumehame, right? So our challenge is that we don't have that Mauka to Makai land management capability that maybe West Maui has. Yeah, because they're Mauka to Makai, valley, top of the valley to the ocean, right? Our tops and our springs are separated by this community plan designation. So those are just some challenges that I think we wanted to bring forward. So again, oh my goodness, just a reiteration of this Western planning model where the South Maui Community Plan covers these multiple traditional land management areas, right? Whereas in a Hawaiian mindset and stewardship of Wahikupuna, Ukumehame would take a look at, would fall into the Hainamoku, right? We have Waikapu Aupua. I am not going to begin, I would leave that to the people of Nawaiʻeha to understand the complexities of those particular land divisions. But Waikapu Aupua, as once would have been independent in and of itself, is now cut off from its Kealia and its Ma'alaya area, right? And then also Kulamoku from Mauka to Makai. We now refer to our areas as Kulakai as they should be, but also thinking to these Mauka regions, right? And then, of course, Honua Ulamoku covering Honua Ulamakai. Just food for thought. Oh my gosh. So planning considerations with a Hawaiian mindset. Say that, my mom? You don't want? Okay. One of the things we notice, and the things that I mentioned before, is sort of the planning for wetland care and keeping of wetlands, planning for the care and keeping of the watershed. But in this model, the challenge for you is going to be, how do we do that adequately when our Mauka and Makai sections are sort of cut off somewhere in the middle? Yeah. How do we plan for that, right? I could make a crazy statement and just throw the whole thing out and then everybody just go moku by moku. But we are here where we are at, and so that's a challenge, right? Always keeping in mind that Makai and Mauka sections. I just want to go back to that really quickly. This is really washed out, but I thought that this, the title map for Kulamoku was very telling in that to the right of the frame are the gullies, the gulches, the deep ravines of Kulamoka. To the left of the frame is the shoreline of Kulamakai. So understanding that all the waterfall that hits the Mauka regions and runs through those ravines end up in our waters at the end, right? So understanding that from a Hawaiian mindset, right? That's the challenge that we have. How do we best plan for that drainage of Mauka to be able to take care of our wetland and our shoreline resources and our offshore resources? That's a challenge because we're cut off. So integration of stewardship and aina management should be weaved throughout the plan, right? It's not just one cubbyhole in the plan, right? Because from a Hawaiian mindset, planning exists and Hawaiian mindset exists throughout the entire process, whether it's watershed management, wetland management, preservation and stewardship of historic properties, right? And understanding the wisdom of our kupuna from Mauka to Makai, right? So I would challenge this group to not kind of just stick Hawaiian culture in one box, because really the wisdom of our kupuna is so vast that from a Hawaiian mindset, these values, our kupuna values, can extend throughout the entirety of the plan, whether it's malama'aina, whether it's care and keeping of iwi kupuna, whether it's care and keeping of our resources, right? What happens Mauka affects Makai, what happens Makai affects our icebox, right? That so many of our kupuna rely on, or have relied on in the past, but for one reason or another, that particular resource is difficult now. And then understanding that kuleana does not end at our project perimeter, right? It extends beyond, whether it's Mauka to Makai, laterally across the coastline. And I chose this map of Ukumehame Ahupua'a because the South Maui Community Plan covers the lower coastal sliver of Ukumehame Ahupua'a on to the right of the frame, right? So what is planned for that section may affect the Mauka regions of Ukumehame Ahupua'a, or access to the Mauka regions of Ukumehame Ahupua'a, without realizing that, you know, you're looking at two competing land management systems, right? The Western system, where South Maui Community Plan encompasses coastal sections of Ukumehame, and the traditional land system, when and understanding Ukumehame Ahupua'a as a whole, right? So again, that's a challenge that you have, and I don't envy you those challenges. It's rough. So, me being an archaeologist, I'm just going to flow right into, okay, so what do we do about historic preservation, right? These windows into our past and the indigenous genius of our kupuna. So understanding that for archaeologists, and I'm just kind of leading here now, it's a little bit fragmented, but indigenous science was always there, right? The West, I just wanted to make this clear, the West does not own science. Indigenous cultures have engaged in observation and experimentation to understand and live within their surroundings for centuries, right? So how can we, as community planners, understand what our kupuna knew from the past and integrate that into how you're developing your watershed management, your wetland restoration projects, so on and so forth. Those are fancy. So, historic properties as windows into our past and the genius of kupuna. So I just kind of wanted to go through what is a historic property. A historic property is any site or feature. It's defined by the HARs, the Hawaii Administrative Rules, as any site or feature or complex that is 50 years or older, right? So they can run various periods of time, and all are important to know about because it speaks to the story of these spaces, right? So in traditional Hawaiian, for traditional Hawaiian sites, these are sites that we document prior, that were created prior to Western contact. They could be agricultural sites that help us to understand how these spaces were utilized in the past. how our kupuna lived off the land, how they engaged in utilizing the different geologic reliefs, the topography, the sunlight, and the rain seasons. And so we'll find these sites in very interesting places. And when you sit there for a little bit of time, you can understand them better. It's like, oh, well, this area gets sunlight during the summer months for, 8 hours out of the day, right? It makes sense that it's on this side and maybe not on the other side of this ridge, right? There are house sites, kauhale, the genius of our traditional Hawaiian layout, where we have our sleeping areas, our cooking areas, our gathering areas, our ceremonial spaces, and our shelters. We also have spaces on the landscape that reflect late 18th century and 19th century sites. And these spaces and these sites have absolutely positively had an effect on, one, the cultural makeup of our environment and our communities with the influx of plantation infrastructure. And these are typically characterized by materials, Western introduced materials. Here are a couple of examples of fencing, branch fencing with barbed wire, this beautiful glass, what do you call this? Sorry, my brain is not, it's been a long day. The telephone pole thing. Insulators. So that one we could actually date to 1920. And also, we're able to, Uncle Eddie Boy Chang was reminiscing about a telephone line in this area, the very first for McKenna in the 1920s, and lo and behold, that particular insulator is dated to the 1920s. So we have the cultural material, physical, and we have the mo'olelo of our communities. So how do we integrate these in a meaningful way in this plan so that we can perpetuate these stories and honor these spaces? And then we also have very important sites, of course, that reflect different eras. For some in our communities, painful. And these sites are usually characterized by engineered areas. This is the EMI, a section of the EMI water irrigation system. And in that, those issues mean many things to many people. But at the end of the day, that irrigation system brought water to the central isthmus, part of which is in your community plan, some of these features extend into those areas, and it allowed the central isthmus, where it may not have been able to sustain the level of sugar that it did prior to the development of this system. With this system, they were able to expand their fields and bring in labor from other places, right? And so that, and the fact that system also influenced the social community makeup that we are also familiar with today, right? Our multi-ethnic, multicultural communities that we have. That is just an example. That's an example of plantation housing in Lanai that would have been, that is considered significant for that historic district. And then, of course, features from Naval Air Station Pu'unene, right? And so Naval Air Station Pu'unene being important in the sense from U.S. history as one of the main stations following the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the entrance of the U.S. into World War II. Naval Air Station Pu'unene was, sorry, I have a Jim Falk in my head. The Naval Air Station Pu'unene was developed shortly thereafter, and quite quickly. And so today, when you go past those fields, those sugarcane fields, before you may not have noticed them so much because the sugar grew over them, and now you see them a lot. And those are what that is what those represent, right? The bunkers, the splinter shelters, and the base quarters for what was once a very large and sprawling air station in the middle of Maui's isthmus. So that's a lot of words, and I'm not going to go through it all, but I just kind of wanted to touch on the historic preservation review process, just so that you have these thoughts as you're writing about land management and development. Step one, identification and inventory. So that is where you see archaeological groups going out to survey the land prior to any kind of large land development. Okay. Step two is for all of the historic properties that are identified during that survey, we have to evaluate those sites for significance. More and more, we are reaching out to communities for consultations to help us with those significance determinations, right? Because our communities vary, and so each property needs to be evaluated for various things, whether or not it's information important to the continuance or important to the identity of Native Hawaiian groups, of different or other ethnic groups. Good example, or it's related to someone very important. So once that goes through that, then we determine the effect to those significant historic properties. What kind of effects is a project going to have on a historic property? And it can be, all right, so you're going to plan to completely develop an area. It's going to have an adverse effect on the historic properties if they need to be removed in your plan. Is there an area where you might have a visual effect? It may not be on your project site, but perhaps there may be a visual effect. So one example of that where we've had to consider that is a project for the Boys and Girls Club at Ho'opukalo. I can talk about it because it's published. But above Ho'opukalo, there is a very prominent heiau site, Haleki'ipihana heiau, right on the ridge there. And so we needed to understand whether or not modifying the clay court at Ho'opukalo was going to adversely affect the view plane of that space, or was it going to adversely affect ceremonial practices that would need to view out. And at the end of the day, it was far enough away from Haleki'ipihana heiau that we didn't feel it would have a visual effect. We weren't going up any stories or anything like that. I think it would be a very different situation today if Waiuku Industrial were to come up for review in light of Haleki'ipihana heiau, because it's right at the base of that heiau, right? So different things, and things change over time. But that's one example of having to determine whether or not there's going to be an effect to a significant historic property. And if there's an effect, it goes to step 4. And that's the mitigation commitments. And so I think everyone here is familiar with mitigation documents such as preservation plans, such as monitoring plans, so that there's an archaeologist or a monitor on site to ensure that those sites that are in preservation are not damaged to that effect, right? We proceed to stage 5, development of the mitigation plans. Step 6, you carry out the mitigation plan, and development occurs. And then what happens next? That's my challenge to everyone here. We have these beautiful preservation areas in South Maui, or Kulakai, Honuaula. When a project is done, when the preservation plan interim measures are complete and the signage is in, what happens 2 years from then? What happens 5 years from then? What happens 10 years from then, right? And so that's been the new challenge and the food for thought that I would like to present to you. What happens next? Preservation and stewardship are the kupuna footprint thoughts for your planning process, right? know where your existing areas are that are in preservation and locate them to be able to plan adequately for the future care and keeping of these spaces. What are these spaces, right? And so many people know so much about this area. So these are just kind of like things that are just food for thought, top of the head thoughts, right? So the ko'a at Kihei Public Library, right? It would be great to understand how that space is utilized. It would be great to understand what protective measures are in place for that space. It would be great to take a look at the preservation plan, understand that there's a monitoring or a maintenance program, and understand whether or not that's being carried out, right? And who is responsible for that, right? How do we understand that? The fish ponds of Kulakai, my goodness, these places are amazing. If you look at it from the air, in an aerial, these spaces that could provide for food sovereignty, but first we gotta clean up our water, right? These spaces that are kupuna built, that are linked to Mo'olelo Kau, right? And the great work that Cody's doing in this wetland area. You know, how can we support that and understand it and not forget about these lokoi'a in Kulakai? I have a hard time when people say that there's no Hawaiian footprint in Kulakai. When I just look out in the ocean, I'm like, oh, there it is, right there, right? So how do we elevate that? Can you elevate that as a part of this plan? Can you elevate the care and keeping of these spaces and programs that support these spaces as a part of this plan? The Ahihikina'o Natural Area Reserve, that place is amazing. Luckily, it's under preservation and you don't get a whole lot of foot traffic in there. So, but how do we know exactly what's going on in there? Is there some sort of reporting process that we can ask the non-risk guys for? And understanding, because that also is in your community plan area. Sorry, okay, running. And the Makena archaeological preservation areas, right? We have set aside large areas for preservation in Makena area, in Wailea 670. That was an amazing feat to be able to pull that all together. What next? 10 years from now, how do we engage these spaces? How do we activate these spaces? Above and beyond the physical, constructed kupuna footprints that we have our wahipana, right? So they're not exactly rooted in constructed features, but they are amazing geological features. Pu'ola'i and Molokini and a manifestation of Inaina in this space. Inaina being the mo'o that had a beef with Pele, or Pele had a beef with her because they were kind of hanging out with Lohiao, Pele's man. You don't do that, you don't hang out with Pele's man. And Pele getting upset and severing Inaina right down the middle. So Molokini being the head of Inaina and Pu'ola'i being the tail of Inaina, and understanding that connectivity, that creation story for that space, right? How can you incorporate that into your plan? And also be able to understand that, like the effects of that, not just from the land perspective, but from the aquatic perspective, from the marine perspective, right? I don't know if the community plan extends out to Molokini, but that would be great if it did. And other things like trails, like the Pi'ilani Trail, and keeping that open and accessible, but safe, right? Because it's rough walking out there. So that's a challenge. We want to have access to these spaces, but we also need them to be safe, right? And to make them safe, does that mean signage saying go at your own risk? Does that mean improvements, therefore affecting the integrity of that site? So you guys got a big job. So then how do we effectively and adequately take care of the spaces that advocacy has fought so hard to preserve, right? So just some bullet points here, some thoughts that come to mind. County initiatives, Friends of Kulakai types of organizations. I've had wonderful conversations with David Yamashita at Parks, who was like, you know, when he was on the continent, there were friends of certain parks who help to maintain and were eligible for grants to be stewards of these spaces. Is that a county initiative that can be put forward? Is that a community initiative that can be put forward? Because again, we struggle with capacity, right? Everybody's working, everybody has lives. So how do we gain capacity to be able to care for these spaces that were fought so hard for and put into preservation? So some thoughts, HOA responsibilities. Maybe, I know a lot of, there are different areas where there are mandates for certain HOA fees to get incorporated into care and keeping of spaces. What about these older places that, you know, is there a community fund that can then be put out into these spaces through HOA fees? I live in a condo, I have HOA fees. I personally wouldn't balk at it, but then, you know, I'm an archaeologist, so I'm like, all right, take my money. But you know, just working to educate our community members about the importance of these spaces and the identity that it gives to these areas, right? Opportunities with DOE, the different educational areas, opportunities with UH Maui, community boards, Community Association, I'm looking at you, Wailea Community Association, I'm looking at you. Meaningful engagement with Kanaka Oiwi, and by meaningful, I mean truly hearing what the Kanaka of these regions have to say, or these areas have to say, and implementing responsible stewardship agreements, responsible stewardship ideas, and outreach to Kanaka nonprofits. We have growing nonprofits that are beginning to have wide reaches, right? And if we can elevate those nonprofits that come from a Hawaiian mindset at the beginning, they have a very intuitive way of approaching conservation. Art Medeiros' work at Auahi, Aina Momona, Uncle Walter Rudy's work, he's expanding out and starting to do work in other spaces under Aina Momona. Those are just examples of Kanaka nonprofits that come from a Hawaiian mindset that can be integrated into different aspects of management, conservation, and resource care. And that's it. Mahalo.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy that you're going to be staying to talk to us later. In the meantime, I'm opening up for public testimony. So we have two topics today. One is the one we just started on, the Wahi Kupuna and historical sites stewardship, and the second one is finishing up the Maukatalakai watershed management. There's a 3-minute limit on testimony. So first testifier is welcome to the microphone. And please state your name and which topic you're talking about.
Hello, my name is David Dawn. I sent in written testimony 2 times, and so I covered a lot of things. This meeting bridges 2 issues, 2.4, the watershed control, and 2.5, the cultural Wahi Kupuna. I find that there's a lot of crossover, so I'm going to not speak on cultural matters. I'm not a cultural expert. I'm a researcher, and I'm a good listener. But the intersection, 2 things I'd like to talk about today is, one is that groundwater should be considered a cultural asset. And this might be obvious to Kanaka and Hawaiians, but I think it needs to be stated at this meeting. Claire Apana at the previous meeting said the Kumalipu talks about the narrow waters, referring to groundwater. So we have the broad waters, which are the surface waters, the streams, the gulches, the floods. And then we have the groundwater, which is man was born of the broad waters, surface water, and woman was born of the narrow waters. That's pretty fundamental. It's talking about the birth of humans. So the groundwater was well known to Hawaiians. It was used in their daily life, the sources for springs. And Kapuna can tell you that they used to swim out offshore here in Kulakai and get fresh water from under the ocean in gourds and collect it. So we're going to be looking into that a little bit more closely to find out exactly where these springs are. And there is research going into the springs and where the Malkadamakai groundwater actually exits in Kulakai. I'm glad that the presentation talked about fish ponds, because at the end of this street, in one block over Waipuilani Road, is Keokeakai, which is a massive indigenous watershed engineering project of Loko Kawapa, which is a walled fish pond in the ocean. And it's, you know, the walls have long since been tumbled down a little bit beneath the surface, but it's very obvious from the air. And very obvious to me, because I've spent many, many hours in the ocean there, and I've kicked my foot on it more than once. And I've spent a lot of time looking into the fish ponds. And, you know, there's 4, maybe 9 fish ponds in Kulakai, and we'll talk more about that later. But we spent a lot of time in the air, looking at, you know, georeferencing maps, doing a lot of droning, doing a lot of survey flights. And one thing that we have noticed, and everyone will talk about the limu, the connection with the limu and the groundwater. What's that, 3 minutes? Okay.
Thank you. Do we have any clarifying questions from the committee members? Gilkey? Oh, or Daniel? Let's Gilkey first, and then Daniel.
David, mahalo for coming. Sorry, you guys, not clarifying question, just mahalo. Obviously, this is a lot of research and a lot of manao, so I appreciate what you're sharing with us. Thank you.
Daniel?
Hello, David. Nice seeing you again. Mahalo for your testimony. That's quite a bit of research you've done. I just want to know why why you're so passionate about what you're doing. I mean, look all the work you've done. What motivates you to do this? I'm just curious.
Okay, good question. Well, I started off ocean sportsman, some of you know, in the ocean my whole life, and experienced the conditions, you know, in the ocean right here, Waipuilani Beach Park, and you know, all the beaches along the south shore here, and noticed what happened with the flooding, noticed the changes and what have you. And you know, I love the ocean so much here. I bought a house a block back from the ocean, and I found out it was in the flood zone. So I kind of got caught up into understanding how the watershed works and the flood zone and its relationship to the ocean and water quality conditions in the ocean, because you know, I spent a lot of time in the ocean, so my family and friends, and I wanted to learn about, you know, how to make the ocean better. So I'm really from a point of view of, I love the ocean, I want to make it better, I love the environment, and you know, it's been driven from that. So I'm actually involved with, you know, community groups and people really looking closely at the watershed. And the more I learn, the more I want to learn, and that drives me forward.
I wish whatever you have was contagious, so that more people would feel the same way as you do. So thank you.
Any other questions from the committee members? Thank you. And the next testifier, please. Going once, going twice. Public testimony is closed. So this time, if Tanya and Kawanobi could please come back so we can talk to them a little bit. So questions or comments from committee members does not just have to be clarifying questions. Daniel?
I got to put on my distance glasses. So thank you, Tanya and Kanoi, for being here. I do have some. I have several questions, so I'll ask a couple, and then we can just see who else has any questions. Okay, with regards to shifting, State Historic Preservation Division, what enforcement power do they have? Say if someone does not follow a preservation plan, or there's a violation of the preservation plan, what can SHPD do, if anything?
Well, it depends on where folks are at in either their construction process or after, right? So at the end of the day, clear violations of a preservation plan can be subject to fines. That investigation, of course, has to go to BLNR, where the final say comes from as to whether or not a fine will be levied. And that's spelled out in the administrative rules. First and foremost, and then if folks are in construction and there is a violation of the preservation plan, SHPD can make a request to the county agency to put a stop work order on a permit, and we've seen that a couple of times on Maui. At that time, SHPD and or the Maui County archaeologists would go out to the site to do the investigation to see whether or not the complaints are clear violations of a preservation plan. And that requires a deep understanding of what are the measures that are there and whether or not there's a violation. So the two avenues: fines if the project is still in construction, stop work order.
Okay, just to clarify, so one avenue is through the Board of Land and Natural Resources. They have enforcement power?
The administrator will submit to the board, and they will have to make the final decision on whether or not to levy the fine. That's my understanding of that.
They can levy fines then.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is through the county.
The county through a stop work order if a project is in construction.
And it would be the county that would levy fines
They wouldn't levy the fine.
or violations
They would place a stop work order.
to stop it.
The only entity, under my understanding, that has the ability to levy a fine for violation of the preservation plan is SHPD recommendations to BLNR.
Okay, so the county can do a stop work order, and then it's the Board of Land and Natural Resources that ultimately can levy a fine. I have more questions, but I'll yield to anybody else.
I just one clarification as well. So after, say a project is constructed, and you have it, and that resource is in sort of the public realm, like the ko'a at Kihei, at the library. Certainly there are things in place that say destruction of this resource will result in penalties and fines by in the administrative rules. Again, it's kind of one of those things where that person has to knowingly violate that or commit that action. So if the sign were obscured and somebody was going to go and collect rock, pohaku off of a ko'a for a wall or a gardening feature, they could say, I didn't know. They have to have full knowledge that they're in violation of the preservation area. So that's why I'm advocating for education across the board so that people cannot say, I never know.
Other questions? Kyoki? Aloha Kaunai, aloha Tanya, mahalo for coming and sharing your knowledge. So I live near the border of Ukumehame and Imala, Ukumehame and Waikapu. I've seen an old map that had documentation of a lot of the archaeological features up there. Are you aware of this map, and if so, is there another one that has been documented as far as some of the features up there in the Valipano?
Are you talking about
the sites that are off of the Pali Trail.
So, and excuse me, I forget the name of the person that did this documenting. I'm talking about like directly behind the harbor and along the borderline of where we kind of refer to now as the Malaya Malka property. Yeah, that area.
Yeah, I'm aware of the various archaeological maps or inventory survey results in that area. Yeah.
So, again, it kind of dabs a little bit with what Daniel was saying. So, again, it's up to us to decide and debate how close or even at all near anything, yeah? Because there's a lot more there than I think a lot of people know. So,
So, in those cases, I would advocate for getting a hold of those preservation plans, right? If those sites are in preservation, getting a hold of the preservation plans so that you can make informed decisions about how far away from certain areas they need to be, and then also understanding from the folks who have an affinity for those places, who have been with those spaces, what the proper distance from those are.
Other questions? Cody? And then back to Daniel.
Aloha. Mahalo for coming and mahalo for your time. One of the things that you're saying that was up on the board was land management. And whenever I think about land management, right, I think about like the management of the resources, the vai, the kai. And I feel like that word, land management, hasn't been thought about in that context of kupuna for a long time, yeah. So I would see a lot of the water being pushed out into the ocean nowadays, with no real regard to what is going on outside in the shoreline, right? In your work that you've done in the past, what are some of the things that you found that relate to Malama?
Do you mean like archaeologically?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you asked that, because we've come across sites in upcountry, Keokeawahuli area, where initially it was thought to be there's these alignments that go across the swales, the drainages, and they're not completely across. They just kind of, some go all the way across, some go to the center line, and another opposing one from the other side. Right? And that has been interpreted, and I've thought that as well, that, swale agriculture, it's a great way to harness the water. But recently I've been looking at these other spaces and understanding different land management and understanding how the water flows. And the question that I ask myself is, are these alignments that are in the swale, are they agricultural alignments for mahi'ai, or are they traditional methods of slowing the water down as it comes through the swales there? So understanding, so that's an interest. I'm just struggling with that in terms of land management and watershed management and control of flow. So those are one of the ideas that we're kind of looking at, is this traditional water control feature. Are these traditional water control features above and beyond the OY system, where you pull water into the irrigation ditch, you water your lo'i, you slow the water down, and then it comes back into the water source? Yeah. Is this another way to look at these large open swales with these ways to slow the water down? traditional ways to slow the water down.
We've been talking a lot about that the last several weeks. Yeah, very important topic to us.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to add on that too, is that like, you know, a lot of times we notice, we hear about ceremonial sites and hear about the work that they're doing, but we're not really noticing all the intricacies that are happening in between, yeah? Like if you go work in a taro patch, a lot of people think it's about, you know, just planting kalo and pulling kalo, but when you're actually working there with someone who knows what he's doing, then it's really about understanding how to control the water, how the water moves, where the water moves, how to balance the water. And so it's like, you know, talking about Hawaiian land management, I feel there's still so much to understand. Yeah, that's why a lot of the item needs to be preserved so that we can still learn about that. So, wow.
I'm going to get Daniel back to work and then you win, okay?
I wanted to talk about the question you posed, what happens next? So, preservation plans after construction, the sites there has a plaque. There are places like that in neighborhoods, in the KA library, public library, in people's yards, for example, right? So who's responsible for monitoring and maintenance? I'm sure it's in the plan. Some entity or someone is named, right, as being responsible for monitoring and maintenance. Is that correct?
Yeah, usually it would run with the land, right? The preservation plan would run with the land. And where you have maybe a subdivision development, you know, that would fall to, or may fall to a homeowners association, right? And be attached to whatever materials that big, huge book of papers that you get when you purchase into, or you have a home that has a homeowners association, right? And so usually they're attached to that kind of documentation. The challenge is, and it's a very real challenge, is the potential loss for institutional knowledge. I will admit that I have not read every single page of my homeowners association, thousands of pages of responsibilities until somebody points out, like, I have a bicycle in my front yard, you're not supposed to do that. I'm like, we're just saying that. But, you know, one of the challenges, of course, is just that thing, you know. When you have a preservation plan that's 200 pages, and really the meat of the preservation plan as it pertains to a landowner is maybe 1 page with 10 bullet items, or 4 pages with the bullet items, you know, I would advocate for that making its way into not just an appendix of the homeowners association, but actually a part of an onboarding process, right? Which is something that I've advocated for in different respects. So you go through, when you purchase a place, you go through some kind of orientation as to what your responsibilities are, or what the homeowners association responsibilities are. And then you cannot say, I never know, like, I didn't know about my bike until you pointed it out, right?
Go ahead, run the next, and you can continue.
Onboarding process, so that's an idea. Who follows up on monitoring and maintenance? I'm guessing that nobody does. You know, all the preservation plans, who follows up on it, or is it just complaint driven?
You know, it's largely presently complaint driven, to be quite frank. measures in preservation plans that allow for SHPD to conduct quarterly, semi-annual, or annual inspections. But we all know that SHPD is extremely busy. So if we can help them with that responsibility, or help them, since with that kuleana, it would just make everything lighter for them and just more fulfilling, I think, for the space, because it's not just the government agency taking care of that space, it's the community that surrounds it that's taking care of that space. But again, I understand that, I know that, you know, it can be a difficult thing to dedicate so much of individual time, right? So building capacity for that, how do we build capacity?
Brennan, I need that Brennan have any
Yeah, I just have two more questions, but I'll yield.
Brennan, you can have it again, it's just.
Yeah, I like what you guys just talk about, what you explained. You know, it's our community gotta kind of help out. You know, in caring, you know, for not only historical features, but even you know, somebody taking sand or cutting our kiawe trees and selling them on social media. You know, the community gotta step up and do something about it. I mean, so that's what we're trying to do. That's the goal. This is for a planning question. Did we ever consider like including preservation plans or documentation in our draft, in our binder? Maybe I missed that in the past, or because maybe that would help us out.
No, I don't believe so, but I guess my question would be, when you talk about including preservation plans within the document, are you talking about more framework driven or specific preservation plan?
Example, so we know where the fish ponds stay. Maybe there's some cultural features within our community plan that we don't know, and then maybe that would help us in our plan, if that makes sense. I mean, kind of too late, but I just was curious. It wasn't considered, and that's okay.
No, I don't believe it was, but that sounds like something that would be a great action item.
Okay, I get one more question. Actually, it's a comment. So, you know, Tanya is talking about Ukumehame, Kelia, Malaya, and this has always been a broken record challenge for me. So here we are, community plan, South Maui. And then what we implement is going to impact people from Ukumehame. You know, and then for me, as we crossing boundaries, you know, we don't live today as the simple value of when we used to go holo holo to Makena. You know, you always say hi. We always say hi to the families. And then it's kind of like a permission, okay, to go holo holo, go camping, go fishing, and then when you pow, you get extra, you always share your catch. You know, even we don't do that today. You know, we don't, no one practices. I mean, in my family, we do that. No matter what moku we go to, we always do that. So hard for me to implement something that going to impact those families at Ukumehame and Malaya. You know, at least we get one representative from Malaya, so I know. I check Brada out, you know, hey, you know, this is okay, not cool. But Ukumehame is kind of like creating one new itch for me in my activities right now. But that's my challenge. This has been my challenge the last 3-4 Wednesday nights, because we were disconnected with Mauka, and we crossing boundaries into Wailuku Moku, the Aopua, Waikapu, and also Lahaina Moku with Ukumehame, so that's kind of tough. Any thoughts you'd like to add to that?
Well, no, just a challenge, you know. Would it be something to have somebody from Kumehame here, you know, maybe not here, but present as a advisory resource? Would it be a wise thing to have somebody from Waikapu who has a connectivity to Kealia present or engaged with just some thoughts, so that you can make informed decisions for the places and spaces that fall within the South Maui Community Plan area, but are truly a part of an entirely different land management, Hawaiian land management area.
I just want to point out that the current community plan we have from 1998 does have a list of 31 important sites. That is something that could be done if we wanted to. It's up to us.
So, excuse me, Chair, I just wanted to add that this is a wonderful comment to include in the Maui Island Plan to make sure that these kind of things are considered. So I'm taking some notes for that, which is, you know, the bigger picture document for the whole island. So, I also wanted to say that, like for bigger permits, when the department consults with, say, SHPE on certain things, SHPE's comments often get incorporated into permit conditions, and so the property or the applicant would be required to follow those conditions from SHPE because they get incorporated as part of the permit.
And back to Daniel.
So to echo what Vernon said and what you started off when you began your presentation, from our first meeting, we had a challenge with Maka to Makai. We're working with a plan, a Western-based plan that looks at South Maui running north-south, not east-west, not Maka to Makai. And it's very challenging for many of us to do that because the traditional land management system is much more rational. So it's a challenge. You know, this will be our 5th meeting working on watershed in part. And because it's difficult to work with a watershed when you can't go all the way up to the top of the mountain. So in a way, we're struggling with the dysfunctionality of the plan, right? So like Tanya, you suggested folding traditional management values into the plan. Well, we can do that. But to me, it's not enough. It's still not enough. So it would be great if you could, maybe you can suggest some language to help us as in the community plan policies and goals to help us to foster this idea of traditional land management throughout the plan. You know, even though we can't do it on the practical ground level, but would you be willing to spend some time thinking about that? Maybe not tonight, maybe suggesting some language for us to work with?
Yeah, I can think about that. I mean, short of saying somebody from this body should have a seat at the table at the Upcountry Community Plan, but you know, I can think of that. Whether I don't know how far this plan can go with suggesting Malka partnerships or something like that, but I can try to put some thought to it.
Any further questions?
Just one comment to add to that. I would think that the action would be to ask for a representative from Malka to participate, and that be reciprocated when the Malka plan is done. And if at all possible, down the line, once the community plan is done, which I think we're working backwards. I said backwards. That should have been updated first to me. And the community plans would supplement that overall community plan. So because we're working backwards, like trying to fix the flooding here in South Maui, maybe if we truly work as a community rather than as individual communities, because we all traverse the communities here, no matter what we do. In our everyday life, we traverse all of these communities. Therefore, we impact each community. So that somehow, if there can be some way of fixing what was wrong, kind of like what Kalekoa's presentation was about. We can't, I have no idea how to fix who owns the land, right? So, but can we do better plans, better community, better working relationships, which is what our kupuna did. So bringing back that kupuna knowledge of how to build a community and what a healthy community looks like. If you have a healthy watershed, you have a healthy community. That's the bottom line. And how do you do that? You gotta work from Mauka to Makai and traverse both ways. So that's my suggestion. Somehow build that community of knowledgeable, caring individuals that encompass this generational knowledge that can be shared.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? Okay, thank you. If you are able to, we really appreciate if you stay a while longer, because questions may come up as we work on the items, and we may have input that we really would like to have. But okay, at this time we'll start this guy. So the first one I think is left over from last. Pardon? Past break time. We usually do 7:30. Is it? For this time? Okay. It's kind of early to take a long break. We're going to be here until maybe 9. So, 5-minute break, and then we can take a 10-minute break a little bit later, because I think we'll need another break. Five-minute break.
Frank? No. Well, thank you for
We've been talking about this topic very
I had a, yeah, a big,
very interesting. We had a whole section on how we can solve the problem. We've been
reiterating.
We're struggling. Yeah, we're struggling.
I know it's a hard thing.
Although actually, some of the things, our boundary is a couple miles north of the mountain. So we got some land.
Yeah.
But yeah, ideally we can get a picture.
And it's hard. It's hard. Creating partnerships or community, partnerships, whatever country.
Right.
Creating your farming practices.
Yeah, get something to eat.
Start finding our seats because we have a lot to do today. Everybody, please start finding your seats. Have a seat so you can get started. Resuming at 6:48 p.m. So the first thing I think we have to do is left over from a couple of weeks ago is item 2, the policy 2.5.1, where we have some new language proposed by the planning department. Would it be possible to get that on the screen? So you can... And then there was a testimony from Johan to add after permits to add or exemptions, seeking county permits or exemptions. So so I hope everyone has it in front of them, because it might be hard to read on the screen. Yes, so we have new language here proposed. I'll read it. Okay, so the proposed language is require development projects seeking county permits to provide continued access to Kuleana lands and preserve and protect access to areas both Mauka and Makai, any lands where Native Hawaiian rights were customarily and traditionally exercised for subsistence, including fishing, hunting, and gathering, cultural or religious purposes. Applicable laws include Section 7-1 Hawaii Revised Statutes, Article 12, Section 7 of the Hawaii State Constitution, and the Hawaii Supreme Court's past opinion, 79 Hawaii 425 from 1995. Daniel?
I'd like to make a motion to add or exemptions after permits in the first sentence, as suggested in written testimony, and everything else remain the same.
Is there a second? Second by Brandon. Okay. Discussion? I believe that this was discussed at some length earlier, since this is the new text which corresponds to that request at that time. Any objections to the text, including or exemptions, so county permits or exemptions? And we've adopted 2.5.1 with the additional 4 exemptions. So before we leave policies, I think we've been through all the policies that were proposed. Are there additional policies? Quick,
Chair, I just wanted to make note, if everybody's aware that in the policies section there were 4 under wastewater that we didn't even get to. Are you aware? 2.316 to 2.319.
I think we're going to finish up this 2.5 first.
No, I just wanted to make note of it.
Okay, yeah.
We're going to obviously we'll get back to it.
Yep, thank you. So at this time, are there any additional policies for Section 5, Vahe Kupuna and historical properties? Daniel?
Can we go to 2.5.4? Okay, I see it. I'd like to add additional language to 2.5.4 and to read as follows: protect dark skies, comma, Mauka and Makai public view corridors, and everything else is the same.
Is there a second? Second by Brandon.
Okay.
Second by Brandon.
My reasons for adding Mauka and Makai is, you talk about public view corridors, I think about like Pi'ilani Highway, South Key Road, and I think it's really important that we protect those view corridors so that we can see Malka too. We can see Haleakala. That's an important viewshed, as well as being able to see towards the ocean. Because if you drive down Pi'ilani Highway, over the years, some of those U corridors, especially in Makai, have been obstructed. And although there was testimony to mitigate it, and they did mitigate buildings and their heights and their spacings, it still resulted in losing some of the Makai views. Now moving forward, we're going to probably build Malka up the highway, and so I think it's important that we protect those view corridors looking Malka too up to Haleakala, because I love it, being able to see Haleakala as I drive down Pi'ilani Highway. So that's my reason.
Any comments? Cody?
Sorry, what is a view corridor?
Hey. Yeah, this is the Kanaka version. I think what our eyes see, like right there. Like this is our corridor. Maybe. What our eyes see. I don't know if it's 10 feet wide or 2 miles wide, but it's what this is our corridor right here. What we see. I mean, that's my perspective. This we're planning. So let's say my house, and then some guy would build a 6-story house because over there the zone will change, and then I lost my view. So when's a good time to implement something so that never happens? It's not the time, of course. Yeah. You know what I mean? This probably will come up because the Mr. Brown's house came across my mind just now.
So I'm just trying to think of how this works. I'm not in current division planning, which processes a lot of the permits, but usually the best time to come in would be when the permit is being reviewed by, say, the Maui Planning Commission. That's when the public testimony that would be the best time, because then the structure is still only on the drawing board, it's not actually under construction. A lot of this is going to depend on like the location, if it's in the special management area, which would have, the SMA permit requirements or not. If it's not in the SMA, then it doesn't need that special permit, but the zoning also determines the height. And so if a zoning district, like say it's B2, business district like Island Surf, down over there, their height limit might be more than, say, a residential district, which would be, say 30 feet. So it's dependent on a number of factors.
Any objections to the addition to 2.5.4? Fine, we have passed that addition to 2.5.4. Anything more on policies for Kupuna and historical property stewardship? Okay, let's move on to actions.
I did have more suggested policies. Which I submitted these recommendations in earlier meeting we had, the last meeting we had. I don't know if you have a copy of that. It was at our, I think it was our February 8th. But anyway, one of the suggested policies I had, which is really taken out of the Kihei McKenna community plan, partly was to protect traditional Makan Makai and shoreline accesses.
We have a second.
Is that the one that's you suggested additional language for 2.5.1? It's up on the screen right now.
Okay.
But that was the amended language for 2.5.1 was just including what you had added in there to include the legal. And then this is all of your suggested changes.
Okay. Very good. That was the one you worked on, huh, Karen? Okay. Other policy is, and this is taken out of the Kihei McKenna Community Plan, page 24. Encourage community stewardship of what says historic sites, but I'm adding Wahi Kupuna and historic sites. Encourage community stewardship of Wahi Kupuna and historic sites. This kind of goes along with what Tanya was talking about. We need to build or gain capacity to protect these spaces. And it seems like community engagement would be one way as a policy to build capacity to help protect these spaces. Yeah, encourage community stewardship, and I'm adding Wahi Kupuna after stewardship. Encourage community stewardship of Wahi Kupuna and historic sites or properties.
Is there a second to that motion? Second by Kyoki. Keiko.
This is for Daniel and this body to consider significant in front of historic. Significant in front of historic. I'm just kind of recalling the presentation that I had earlier. We had the identification process, we had the evaluation process, and then we had potential mitigation.
Yeah, encourage community stewardship of Wahi Kupuna. Sticking with the same Wahi Kupuna and significant historic sites or properties. Sites or properties. Either one. And yeah, I just cherry-picked this right out of the Cultural Resources section under Objectives and Policies from the Kihei McKenna Community Plan. Adding Wahi Kupuna and significant.
Discussion? Any objections? Okay, we have adopted an additional policy. I wrote down as encourage community stewardship of Wahi Kupuna and significant historical properties.
Okay, I've got 20 more. I think I have a couple more. Oh, there it is. My eyes on. Maybe I should give somebody else a turn. Nobody else.
I think you're the only one who's proposing additional policies. Go ahead.
I'm a Polliciana, I guess. Okay. Okay, the next one, preserve and restore historic roads and paths as cultural resources and require such resources to be available to the public. Okay, that comes right out of the KA Community Plan, word for word.
Is there a second? Second by Tova. Discussion. Any objections? And we have adopted the language from the KA Community Plan. And one more policy.
Okay, establish cultural parks, preserves, and heritage corridors for visitation and education. So this is another one, word for word, out of the KA McKenna Community Plan under policies and objectives for cultural resources.
Is this something you envision the county doing? In that case, I would put it as an action instead of a policy.
Yeah, it could be an action then, because it could be an action.
Be an action probably would be to be more specific about which ones to preserve or some characteristics of them.
Yeah, I think there was some testimony with regards to culture preserves, which might be included. And if we want this as an action. And then one other one. It's a new one that I just...
Why don't we first see if we want to adopt this one before we go on?
Oh, sorry. I thought we were going to make this an action. It's okay to make an action.
Okay.
And then one other one I'm just kind of thinking about right now is to something along the line of foster the traditional land management model as, sorry, I have to think about this some more. I don't have the correct wording for it, so maybe when we come back to this at a future time, we'll have something clearer formulated. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any more on the policy section before we go on to the actions? Okay. Okay, moving on to the proposed actions for section 2.5. 5.01, establish a code of conduct for county parks with cultural sites in South Maui and install signs explaining the code of conduct at appropriate locations. Is there a motion? If there's no motion, then we'll move on. Okay.
The first one, right?
5.01.
that seems to be an action for policy.
We're on the actions.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's connected to a policy. Has no one made a motion yet?
Nope.
Okay, I make a motion.
Is there a second? Second by Tola. Discussion? Any objections to 5.01 as proposed? And we've adopted 5.01 as proposed. 5.02. Continue and expand collaborative restoration and preservation efforts such as agreements between nonprofits, private entities, and county departments, with priority given to fish ponds, wetlands, and lo'i within South Maui. Is there a motion in favor? Tova makes a motion.
Motion we adopt as written?
Is there a second? Okay, you want to do the second then? No.
Second and then discuss,
Yes. Okay. Okay, seconds.
So when I read this, I feel like some of the ones we've visited in the past where we've added in more, calling out more specific Kanaka entities. You guys feel the same way? You know where I'm going with this kind of sort of? Food for thought.
I don't think we've heard. Yeah.
Yeah. Feels like it should be in there.
So what's the text? What's the text we've used before that might fit in here?
One more time.
What is some text that we've used before that might fit in here?
So between nonprofits, private entities, appropriate Kanaka from the area for, for consultation, things like that. That's the feel I got when I read this. If everyone feels like that would still be included in like nonprofits and that, then so be it. Just wanted others' thoughts.
It does sound familiar. So what have we said before when we wanted to include call out Kanaka participation? Does anyone remember exactly what we did?
Yeah, trying to recall. I know we did something, but yeah, maybe I just trying to figure out some additional words. Not sure yet, just thinking about it. Because, yeah, if we were just thinking about Ukumihami, we got to reach out to those from that area, so just trying to find the right words to honor and respect. We can put Nino or cultural descendants or Native Hawaiian organizations, but not sure on how we're going to title this correctly to keep.
Excuse me, Chair. So Jackie just pointed out some language that maybe we could bounce around. Kanaka organizations, consultations with Kanaka organizations and knowledgeable community members, something like that. Native Hawaiian groups. Karika?
The way I read this action is that this is about stewardship. It's about fostering stewardship. And I read it as interested individuals or nonprofits or organizations that might have a passion for the preservation or caretaking of fish pond, wetlands, lo'i in South Maui, then they can come forward, they can point to the specific action and say that, how do we figure this out? How do we do this? Can we have things such as agreements? Maybe that's ROE or MOU or MOA, something to kind of facilitate that stewardship. But if you want to follow specific groups, then I would suggest adding including but not limited to.
Okay, thank you. Good suggestion.
I think the difference is that I think what you're trying to get is we want to actually recruit and encourage participation by Native Hawaiian. So, there's not just, I mean, it's great that people who want to do this do it. They should do it. But we also want to encourage Native Hawaiian participation. I think that's the idea. So I'm fine with any of those Native Hawaiian organizations.
Yeah, because if they show up or if they know more interest, yeah, at least we included them. Because even at this, if we left it at this, there are non-Hawaiian groups out there that would step up and be consistent, but again, we just, including, not necessarily just this, but just, an invitation for the Hawaiian community to get involved if they so choose to.
Would someone like to make a proposal for a friendly amendment to add Native Hawaiian organizations to for nonprofits? Vernon.
Yeah, I'm Chancellor.
Toba's okay with that? Okay. So continue and expand collaborative restoration preservation efforts such as agreements between Native Hawaiian organizations, nonprofits, private entities, and county departments with priority given to fish ponds, wetlands, and lo'i within South Maui. Any discussion? Daniel?
I'd like to add dryland forest because that's an area I've worked in to that list. And I do anticipate more work being done in dryland forest within the scope of this community plan. That's my friendly amendment.
Accepted by Toba, accepted by Kyoki. Any objections to the updated text, including Native Hawaiian organizations and also dryland forests? And we've adopted 5.02 with those additions. 5.03. Identify significant value kupuna and historic properties in South Maui that the county should purchase for preservation. Do you have a motion? Daniel?
It's more of a question. Identify significant historic properties, properties in South Maui that the county should purchase for preservation. Purchasing historic properties, so that would be the land under these properties. Okay, question.
Is there a motion to adopt this language? Or another language at this point?
Motion to adopt.
Motion by Kyoki. Is there a second? Second by Toba. Discussion?
Well, if you have historic properties, what about adding wahi kupuna? To add that?
It's in there.
glasses on.
Done. Any objections to the text as proposed, 5503?
Could historic properties include like wetlands? Or is something separate that we talked about already?
I think it's coming up, there actually is a proposal for that under watersheds, so we'll probably be getting that today.
Okay.
Toba?
Question. Is preservation enough or is restoration also desirable?
Yeah, I was thinking along those lines too. Preservation, restoration.
I mean, case by case, right? I mean, sometimes that's not an option, but.
Yeah, but do we include like in conservation, all three on that in that box? I don't know.
I would love to see many of these restored.
Oh, restore.
So is that a friendly amendment from?
It's a friendly amendment if people are feeling friendly about it. That sounds really trying to take the pulse on whether or not people think that.
Obviously, you're right that not all old properties can be restored for various reasons, but I think having a goal is a very good thing.
So, the Welcahau Village project. So when I look at that project, I'm looking at that as a preservation. And possibly not restoration. So kind of tricky.
I think where it might matter is just that we want money not just to buy it, but to actually make it better. That's kind of the implication.
If you're gonna amend the language, first for a point of order, I think you gotta redo the motion, because you guys already voted and passed this on. The way that I read the specific action is that this is, again, to help with stewardship, and those in the community, whether if they feel there's a particular property or parcel that merits preservation, then this specific action kind of supports the efforts with the county in purchasing that property for preservation. And then the specific plans or long-term goals for that specific property, I imagine would be worked out in consultation and collaboration with the community or the interested party that kind of brought this to the county's attention. This is just specific language and action that allows us to know what the community might feel merits purchasing for preservation. It might not necessarily include restoration, it could, but that would be more of the long-term discussion and consultation effort after the initial stages of acquiring the property.
Yep, that makes sense. Because once it is acquired is for preservation, then further discussion can carry on for restoration and other ideas for that parcel. So that makes sense. Yep.
So, withdrawing the.
Yes, getting less friendly with restoration.
Okay, so the proposal is as on the screen, as proposed by planning department 5503. Further discussion? Any objections?
So we're taking out restoration, right?
Yes. Yeah. Any objections? And we've adopted 5.03 as proposed. 5.04. Identified additional locations in South Maui to host and hold community-oriented art and cultural events with priority given to events that perpetuate Native Hawaiian cultural practices.
Wayne's house.
What's that say?
I was identifying an additional location, Wayne Nishiki's house. If he supports that.
Done. Is there a motion to adopt this or similar language?
Okay, let's say Hawaiian Julian event, right? We still can invite others outside, right? No gotta be just. I mean,
What do you mean, other ethnic groups?
I think I'm overthinking. Yeah, like Earth Day, my Earth Day friends, they can come in.
This language that is priority to events that perpetuate Native Hawaiian culture, we, the Department of Health, feel it's important to have a distinction because, again, this is for Wahi Kupuna and stewardship, that these events focus on those type of activity and it's not just a collection of food trucks and other for-profit types of events. There needs to be a distinction that fits the particular section that we're doing. But again, priority given, so it's not exclusive. You can include your Earth Day friends.
Yeah, from Puelo.
We don't have a motion yet.
I just want to ask, what about commercial luau's? Because that has been issues in certain other areas. So.
Do we have a motion on this item?
That is why we added community-oriented.
Like the VFW call you luau.
I'll make a motion for discussion.
Is there a second? Second by Tova. I think it is crafted to avoid supporting commercial activities like at the VFW. And I think Karika makes a good point that the reason it's in this section is because it's specifically targeting not just general art and culture, but Native Hawaiian. Any further discussion? Any objections to 5.04 as proposed? I will adopt 5.04. Obtain funding and install signs to identify Wahi Kupuna and historical sites throughout South Maui. Sounds a little bit familiar.
I'll make a motion, because that goes along with action 5.01. So they sort of go together. Let's see. One is, yeah, they do go together. I'll make a motion.
Is there a second? Second by Tova. Is there a conflict of interest here? Just kidding.
Yeah, so I start my new job yesterday, so I gotta be careful. I'm not sure if every cruise and all that stuff, but so I don't know. But point of Manao or information, okay, can I inquire someone from is that possible to ask someone in the audience?
Of course.
Conway. The only reason why I asked him was Kupuno. And
Careful.
oh, okay. So when that happens, 55 and over, right? I think, because then I qualify for benefits. ARP, I think. But no, I asked him because this kind of touchy, because maybe I don't like the sign that identifies this feature, and then it attracts more attention, and the trip advisor kind of website. So that's why I asked him, kind of good and not good.
So what's your question?
Well, what do you think about we labeling some of our places of historical sites when, like, good example, you know, the Hilton property on nice fish pond that is wall that is buried. Maybe we're going to dig them up and feature that, but then again, it attracts people, and sometimes trying to preserve our sites might not, you know, it might bring in more impact that we're not welcome kind of stuff. And then with social media and online services, you know, the arrow points there.
Well, I would think that would come to play when you start discussing which sites would have signs to identify. So when there's a proposal to have a sign installed on that wall, you discuss it and come to an agreement as to whether it should have a sign or not. You can't decide it here, but I feel that there are certain areas that should have signs so that people are aware of where they're at and what significance that site has. So it tells them how they should act, yeah? To respect or to malama or to just, what is it? Ho'omaha, yeah?
Yeah, and also identifying the proper names.
Right, correct.
Yeah, like
Exactly.
it's not Cut Mountain or Little Beach.
So we always complain that people use the wrong names for certain places, like Big Beach. The hair stands up in the back of my head. So that's another way of correcting and informing people of what the proper names are for these different areas. Keeping in mind not to have sign pollution, but where there's significance, yeah, I would think it would be helpful and educational. It depends on the project.
Okay, thank you.
My reflection is that it can only help. I mean, it gives people respect for what they're seeing. It's not a cure-all, absolutely. I mean, I know how many times I've been at the end of Wai'anae Dunes, the Wailuku River end, and there are these Hawaiian graves there, and there's signs that say don't go up there. People still go up there. I think having the signs at least helps a little bit, keep some of the people out, and maybe increases some of the knowledge and the respect.
It also helps to know what's going to be on the sign. Yeah? You don't want too much information and you don't want too little information. But what is the sign going to say? So that's going to be your opportunity to say you don't want a sign, or this is what the sign should say, or not.
further discussion? Kadeka?
And then just to add on to what we've been discussing, so this is not a unilateral process. I mean, this has to involve the community, it has to involve consultation. This is simply putting a mechanism or vehicle in place to kind of facilitate that action, if that helps alleviate some of the concerns or questions.
No, I just wanted to bring that attention, just temperature check.
Okay.
No, thank you for everyone's, well, no, I think it's helping to kind of guide, that's why we're asking that. So, with some language like, with consultation, you guys feel would be appropriate, with some consultation from appropriate Native Hawaiian groups throughout. So that would go like, putting funding, install signs, so identifying like putting historical sites, with consultation from appropriate Native Hawaiian groups. So appropriate would mean like people from the area, people with kuleana and that. What do you guys think?
Who made the original motion? Okay. Do you accept that addition? Tuba? Okay. Friendly amendment accepted. Cool. Further discussion? Any objections? Okay, I find we've adopted 5.05 with that addition.
Chair, point of order. I'd like to make a motion to make Tanya Lee Gregg and Conley Lee resource persons.
I don't know if we've done that in CPAC, but
It'll be a first.
I think it just means bringing them to the table, which I'm very happy to have them if they're willing to sit at the table.
Yeah, every Wednesday, yeah.
Every Wednesday, okay, that might be hybrid.
That's a motion. Hopefully there'll be a second. I mean, for this meeting, I'm just kidding about every Wednesday. Just for this discussion on this section.
The council, they don't actually do a motion for that, they just say, are there any objections? Are there any objections to asking Governor Lee and Tanya to be resource person for this meeting? Okay, you were requested to be resource persons to this meeting. 5.06, last proposed action. Partner with state agencies such as the Illinois County Department of Parks and Recreation and community groups to develop and implement a plan, this is a big one, to more effectively address the impacts of tourism, overcrowding, and recreational businesses on marine resources, shoreline access, and enjoyment. The plan should prioritize Native Hawaiian cultural practices and public shoreline access, and make it easier to enforce existing regulations through the cooperation of various agencies. Wow. Daniel?
Chair, do you feel that maybe this is something that should be put more in the Maui Island plan or countrywide policy plan rather than right here in the GA community plan?
I definitely agree with that. It's not specific at all to South Maui. It's also, I would break this up into several parts because these are some really big things here. Let's just fix it. Any other suggestions to how to deal with this? Okay, so will time department take this and consider if it could be maybe restructured a little bit but entered into the Maui Island plan? Thank you. Any other actions for Section 5, Vahi Kupuna and Historic Property Stewardship. Daniel?
I do. It was in my comments, one suggestion or an action.
For the 5.06, do we need to move and approve, or is that a unanimous consent?
What are we deciding?
That we would restructure and move to the Maui Island plan? Was everybody in agreement with that? Just want to make sure.
Yeah.
It's in here because it's not in the Maui Island plan, and we are hoping to update that soon.
Any objections?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Does the Maui Island plan add just too much tourism? Yes or no?
It addresses it, but it could be strengthened, and that's basically what this action is asking for. And yes, this does belong in the Maui Island plan, like a lot of the actions and policies you guys have looked at, but they're not in there. And when that document is updated, hopefully we will include more of those. But we also can't guarantee what's going in the Maui Island plan.
Tova?
Thanks for the intel, Karen. I mean, based on that, I sort of feel like, what would we lose by including this in action? It basically means if someone came with the gumption to try and pull this off, they could point to this plan and say, support this. I mean, I think we're all in agreement that it's a good effort. It's just kind of Herculean. Would anyone object to unstriking the strikeout and including it? Okay. So I motion we accept it as written.
Is there a second? Second by Gilkey. Okay, discussion?
Trying to figure it out.
Say again? This is huge. I mean, I wouldn't-
Yeah, so this information, I mean, it can be in both, yeah? In some way, shape, and form. So squeaky wheel gets the oil, yeah? So the more it's mentioned, the more oomph it has, yeah? I feel. You guys thoughts?
Oh, it can be on both then. Well, yeah, we'll do that then.
Say again?
Oh, it can be in both. My community plan.
I think it will be because of it's just the timing between the plan developments. There's going to be some overlap.
Yeah, thank you, Karen, for that clarification. I think it gives it a little bit more power now.
My sense is that the more we duplicate things so they're in multiple places, the harder we make it for implementation. Because planning and everyone else is going to look at these things is going to be having to look at many different things. This one says the OM is supposed to do it. Wow.
Oh, so you're saying no duplication?
I think it makes life difficult for those who are going to implement the plans if you have the same thing or similar things. Actually, because if we do it here, it's not going to be identical in the island plan. I think almost guarantee that because the people doing that are going to word it differently.
So then, if the Maui Island plans, we'll call it like a version, can be tweaked, re-languaged to kind of be in the vicinity or close to what we're trying to accomplish with this action that can happen, yeah?
The Maui Island plan will be adopted similar to how this is. So language that's already in an adopted plan would be more likely to carry forward and be put in there. But just like this body can make changes, so can the Maui Island plan group.
I hear what you're saying, Rob, but when I'm reading this, there is nothing that is so dicey or specific. I mean, basically, get everyone together, work together, address the issues, prioritize culture. Even if that's said in different words, like the ones I just used. I just can't imagine that inhibiting progress. So,
Okay, further discussion?
Jackie, so let's say we put this in Maui Island plan. And then we leave this one here, like we duplicated, yeah? And then let's go to the planning commission. The planning commission can play with this one too, right?
That is correct.
But then would the Maui Island plan hold up this language?
This will be implemented before the Maui Island Plan update. So whatever you folks recommend and the Maui Planning Commission and the County Council approves would go into this South Maui Community Plan. When we do the Maui Island Plan update, we would take these updates into consideration, and we would want to make them consistent. So as a department, we would propose probably the same thing if it's something that we'd like to have in there. So, I don't see it being a problem.
If we leave both.
Mike?
Yeah, I think that, as Karen said, it's not in the Maui Island plan now. And if we don't put it in here, it might disappear completely. So I think if, hopefully, us putting it in might lead this or maybe a slight modification in my island plan. If we don't, and they don't, then we'll say, well, gee, I guess we should have done it. So that's what I'm interpreting. I don't see any negative effect for us putting it in. Thank you.
Vika?
Yeah, just completely adding to what Mike just said, and to kind of address the duplication concern. So currently it's not in existence, so having it makes a lot of sense. At which point in time the Maui Island plan does get updated, and this is strengthened and work to better fit the county as a whole, the island as a whole. Then when we go back and actually update each community plan, one of the tasks is going to involve, for all the community plans, duplicate policies and actions. So at some point in the future, it's likely to get removed because it will be an island plan, could be an island plan. It's just currently not in existence, so it's better to have it.
So what's this current state? We have a motion to adopt it from Tova. Do we have a second?
Tova moved and Kyoki seconded.
Okay.
To keep it in the South Maui Community Plan, and then the discussion I also have is and add to MIP. That would just be probably a recommendation, of this group for when that process starts, and it's in my notes too.
Discussion? Any objections?
No.
Okay. So we'll take a vote on this. Those in favor, please raise your hand, say aye. Those opposed?
No.
I find that motion has passed as proposed, 506. Are there any additional actions for the Section 5 on Valley Kupuna and the historical property stewardship? Daniel? Or you have one?
Oh, wow, so fast. Let's see, let's start with the bottom. New action on the bottom: require development projects to identify all cultural resources located within or adjacent to the project area prior to application as part of the county development review process. Further require that all proposed activity include recommendations to mitigate potential adverse impacts on cultural resources, including site avoidance, adequate buffer zones, and interpretation. Particular attention should be directed towards southern areas of the planning region south of Kilohana Drive. So yeah, I worked for days to come up with this language. I pulled it out of the Key McKenna Community Plan, page 24, under implementing actions.
This sounds more like a policy made on an action though.
Could be.
So, yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I changed from the community plan was that I added south of Kilohana Drive. I put that in. Everything else was in there before. So I don't know if it's an action or a policy. It can go either way, but it's under implementing actions in the Key McKenna Community Plan.
That's what sometimes made it challenging to implement the older plans, is that the policies would be actions and the actions would be policies. This is a policy because it's telling them what to require developers, what the planning department should require developers to do.
Okay, then we make it a policy then. It ought to be an action, but can we make this a policy on the policies?
Yes. So that's a motion?
That's a motion, thank you.
Is there a second? Second by Vernon. Discussion?
I suggest that we strike are adjacent to in the second line. So it reads, so it would read located within the project area. I don't know how you identify cultural resources on someone else's property.
Do you accept that? No.
I don't accept that as a friendly amendment. I'm sorry, Everett. But it's very useful when you're doing archaeological inventory survey on a particular parcel to know what other historic properties are within the vicinity in order to give context to the parcel in order to give context to the either archaeological study or archaeological inventory study that you're doing for a particular project, because it's all connected. Even if it's in another parcel, it's still connected. It has a relationship, and it helps to maybe even establish significance of the historic property and archaeological inventory story. So if you ignore the context of what's immediately around, I think you lose a greater understanding of how that site within, say, a parcel that you're developing, you understand how that site may be connected to the other sites. And I think it just gives you a much more holistic picture of what you're looking at. So I'm just understanding as part of an archaeological study or archaeological inventory survey to also include in that study things that are near or adjacent to that property. That way, you're just not looking at a TMK, but you're looking at it more as part of an ili or apana or an ahupua'a. There's value in it.
I agree with you if there's an existing archaeological inventory survey, but if there's no existing archaeological inventory survey on the adjacent parcels, it would be impossible to identify the cultural resources on someone else's property.
Well, I'm just assuming if you're doing a development that requires some sort of historic preservation review, that it would fall under that context. Rather than, I have a parcel and I have to know what's, next to me without actually starting a land use process.
I guess I'm a little bit unclear as far as the identification component that you're requesting. If you're talking about background research, literature review, literature assessment for existing or previous studies and works on adjacent parcels, that's part of the process already. But if you're talking about trying to expand testing methodologies on an adjacent parcel, yeah,
I didn't hear what you were saying. Sorry.
I think you need to clarify the effort as far as identifying cultural resources on adjacent property. If you're talking about literature review and prior studies, that's part of the process, and it will help provide greater context for the subject AIS. But if you're talking about trying to expand current testing methodologies of a particular AIS onto an adjacent parcel, that can't be done.
Maybe instead of historic resources, cultural resources, there should be historic properties that have already been documented in other nearby sites. You're saying that's already going to be included.
Part of the archaeological inventory survey usually includes a background research, and that usually involves a literature review, prior studies within the vicinity. That usually a consultation component that goes into that study as far as making recommendations with the AIS. It also has a component that once the AIS is submitted for review, there's a public commenting period that can also be, you can assert additional comments or recommendations prior to the actual acceptance of the AIS. I'm just talking specifically about testing when you're talking about trenching and test units and excavation as part of an archaeological inventory survey that is limited specifically to the project area only.
I don't know about the implementation, but it seems like the intent is clear. If someone's building something, they might not disturb anything which is right under the property, but they might unintentionally disturb something which is right butting up to it through the process of building there. I think that's probably what they're trying to get to. Wayne?
What is Pi'ilani Highway? And people want to develop and destroy it. The King's Highway.
It would still be limited to the project area and the area of potential effect included in that specific project.
It could be on a different wall.
Again, it would be dependent on the project and the parcels or properties that project involves. The project area could involve multiple parcels, multiple TMK, but that definition or distinction would be part of the property. The project description.
Chair. So it seems to me the way they're using cultural resources here is more like historic properties. Rather than cultural resources, although historic properties can be cultural resources.
I guess the question, Daniel, is what do you envision the specific trigger or mechanism that will be used to identify cultural resources?
An archaeological inventory survey, to me, would be a trigger. And yeah, that in the survey, they would identify cultural properties on adjacent lands. So I think a good AIS would do that already, right? They would include that. But it's perhaps a good checklist for a planner, for a county planner to make sure that that's the case. Since it's a policy.
So I believe there are no changes so far proposed. I mean, there's one that's proposed but rejected. So we have the text as on the screen, which is also in Daniel's testimony.
Yeah, maybe I just amend it to where it says cultural resources, put historic properties, historic sites. And these, in my mind, these would be sites that have already been identified on adjacent properties. So it's not requiring additional work of the landowner on the property that's being inventoried, but just to make sure that it's included in the survey, in the report.
Kavika, then Tova, and Everett.
Ensure would probably be better than require.
Oh, what's that, Kavika?
Ensure would probably better than require. I'm just telling you practical wise what kind of require. I mean, if you're talking about a check and balance about existing studies or existing sites, yeah, we can, as part of our review process, we can try to ensure that.
I'm fine with that.
Well,
I was wondering whether adding the word known along with adjacent would help clarify this piece. You can't go and dig up someone else's yard, so it really is about the known adjacent.
So we're working with an existing policy in the current Kihei-Makana plan. This is a policy that exists now, and maybe wordsmithing it so maybe it's more functional in the new plan.
Can we ask our resident experts to give us some help here?
Yeah, I think because I know that this is a part of the state historic preservation administrative rules, I'm trying to understand how a policy like this could be implemented, or if it's not already a duplicate of what exists at the state level. Within the administrative rules
for inventory survey reports, there is a requirement to go through all of the previous archaeology surrounding a project area or a survey area and identify the results of previous studies so that you can understand what you're finding in context. As far as I heard kind of requests for understanding cultural resources in general, as they include historic properties, as they include gathering areas and things like that. And there's also another mechanism at the state level for, as a part of the environmental review process, 343 and cultural impact assessments that are supposed to identify cultural resources or traditional cultural practices within or around a given area, right? So I'm not quite sure what the question is, but as far as a policy, if it could be something that supports or supports the existing administrative rule and gives additional beefs that up a little bit. But at the end of the day, for a private landowner, their process begins at the permitting level, right? So when an applicant submits for a permit, then that goes to SHPD. So the State Historic Preservation Division must have a permit in front of them in order to comment on whether or not an inventory survey is required or will be needed. So I'm not sure if this policy kind of puts the cart before the horse at the state level, right? So it seems to be two competing policies. At which point, the question is, which point does it get implemented, right? So prior to the developer, sorry, I thought I had heard something about an applicant prior to submitting, or an entity who would like to conduct a project prior to submitting an application that they know already. Yeah, and so that is a little opposite of what SHPD requires, as to you have to submit your application, and then we'll let you know you need to do an inventory, and then they'll look at it. They're not going to look at an inventory survey before they request it. Does that make sense?
Everett?
Tanya, my concern is the adjacent to the project area. No, I think if we can just say based on prior reports or prior archaeological inventory surveys, so it doesn't impose a obligation for one landowner to survey someone else's property. Now, if the report's already done, there's already an AIS, and that's easy, and that's already incorporated anyway, just in archaeological inventory surveys.
Yeah, and again, as a part of the previous archaeology research that's required as a part of the administrative rules, the firm conducting the study needs to look at a broader area. So for example, on the continent, they have very specific rules about you need to look a half mile outside of your project area, right, to understand the full breadth of what your project may impact, whether it's footprint, and I mentioned before, view planes, visual impacts, and things like that. What the state does lack, or maybe there can be a suggestion somewhere, is to start solidifying that. It's whether it's a half mile out, 1 mile out, Mackay sections of your Ampua if your project is in the Mackay reaches, the Malca sections of Yalwa. If your project is in the Malca regions, further define like how far out that goes. And so that's where there's maybe some consternation because the state doesn't mandate how far out you have to look, right? So it can be argued that we looked far enough by looking at 500 feet, So understanding that part of it too. It's a requirement. It can be improved by having a minimum distance, perhaps. But understanding that there's a process in place, and part of that process requirement is to do the research of the site or the areas around, and incorporate that into your report, and look at your site, any site that you find within your specific project area in context. For this as well, it says to further require that all proposed activity include recommendations to mitigate potential adverse impacts on cultural resources, including site avoidance, and so on and so forth. There's no clarification as to whether or not it's adjacent to the project area or just within your project area, right? So I think Mr. Dowling had mentioned, and Kavika as well, you can't make recommendations for somebody else's property, right? So clarifying this language to specify that within your development area, right? But also understanding there is a state process in place.
I'm going to clarify the language right now. I'm going to withdraw my motion. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a good policy, but listening to you and others, it's some issues. And so I'm withdrawing my motion. Thank you, Tanya, for your comments.
Any other?
And Everett, thank you.
Any other additional actions under this section?
Can I make one more comment?
Tanya?
I'm sorry. I had heard about Pi'ilani Trail earlier and like destruction of it in certain regions. I just want to give the example while it's of the McKenna Hotel, right? Originally, Cebu had proposed to close that section of the Pi'ilani Trail altogether and build the hotel on it, which to me is kind of weird because, who wants to build something on a trail that people traverse? Who knows what's going to be walking through your living room or whatever? But through the efforts of Pu'ui'alani o Makena, they pushed the hotel back, right? And though it's not in its original state, it's still honored, and that corridor is maintained. So there's measures that can be put into place to be able to honor spaces, and examples and precedent to look at in terms of Pi'ilani Trail.
You have a question or comment? Kyoki?
No, we have a testimony from Malai Village, and we also had on Kaonohi and Tanya's presentation, there's mention of Pu'ui'alani. Are we good to talk about this now? We're wrapping things up.
Are there any more actions here?
I think Kyoki is going to propose an action.
Propose an action? Okay.
Yeah, well, I wanted everybody's thoughts on this. Okay, so under the section of place 503, right, we identify significant by Kupuna and historic property. We adopted that earlier. Just on the subject of Pu'ui'alani, you guys feel like that would be included in this? As far as there's thoughts and visions of eventually restoring Pu'ui'alani to its original height,
because as we know right now, the landfill and the material that was put on it falls short of that. So there's thoughts and about the possibility of restoring it to its original height, maybe even registering it, as a landmark and having some type of whatever people feel would benefit from this restoration. Do you guys feel like it would be included in this action, or you feel like my thoughts are maybe we should call it out in specificity? Thoughts?
So the testimony asks to be restored, to restore Pu'uhele in consultation, respectfully restored in consultation with medical organizations and knowledgeable community members and stakeholders. So I think it's best if you make a motion and we can discuss it.
Okay. Well, I mean, I just wanted to know, because this is 503 somewhat kind of covers that, but not specifically. So I just wanted to get everyone's know on whether that is good enough and we don't need a specific action, or if not, introduce it specifically. Is everyone aware of where Pu'uhele is in elevation right now as it stands? First of all, the original Pu'uhele is no longer, right? We all know that. What remains now is desecrated, in my opinion, an example of a desecrated historical landmark. Yeah? The cinders were mined for Naval Air Station, Pu'unene, and other places that I'm not aware of that might have gone. Can I turn that back? So the landfill and the material on it was permitted to only a particular height. And the height that you see it now falls short of its original height. And in past weeks I had discussions when we had all the bad rains and all that kind of stuff, like maybe if there was a restoration ongoing with the timing of that, all the material in North Kihei, with permission and analysis, maybe that material can be used for topping until the height is there. Just some thoughts. That's where we're kind of going with Pu'uhele. Kalika?
My only recommendation would be that if you're gonna suggest language to that effect, that it should be a policy. And then somebody like MVA or representatives for the Pu'uhele restoration would then invoke actions 1, 2, 3, maybe even 5.
Okay, so policy and permanent action. Is that what you're suggesting? Yeah? Ooh, it's getting late for language. I'm trying to think of stuff and it's like, at this point my brain is turning into tofu, so.
Support the restoration of Pu'uhele.
That would be a policy.
Yeah.
That
Sure.
was the intent.
Thank you.
Is that your motion?
Sure.
Okay. Is there a second? Second by Cody. Cody.
Discussion? Sorry, doing a job, no answer.
Any objections? Okay. Adopt the policy of restore Pu'uhele. And then specific actions. Kalika?
No, I was suggesting procedurally how it could work. So if that's the policy, whether it's Ma'alai Village Association or other representatives from the community that would actually want to start trying to implement this, then you guys would come forward and, in consultation with the county and whomever else, private landowner, you guys would point to action 5.01, 5.02, potentially 5.03, and 5.05. I'm just saying that the policy, these are the specific actions that you could actually use to help move that policy along.
Okay, thank you for clarifying, Kavika. So there is no need for a specific, yeah, thank you.
And you had another one here about behind the Apollo Trail.
Yeah, so there's been discussion of that, yeah, the trail law. So some of the thoughts from some of the community members that have been brought to my attention, whether or not I agree with them or not, I'm just bringing them to light, is, well, if you look in the testimony, they're talking about recommending doing some upgrades, I think, to parking and possibly signage that can be educational either at the beginning. Has anybody been to that trail lately? Because I haven't. Yeah. What is there at the trailheads on both sides? Any pretty good informational? Yeah.
A lot of the signs are broken and burnt. It's in pretty bad shape. I mean, the trail itself is in good shape, but signage is in really bad shape.
Okay. So, I guess basically in this testimony, they're bringing that to light. As far as the trail, as far as possible signage, the new signage might be needed, education, maybe point out hazards, things like that.
See, it is a state trail, and that's not how they have the trail. It's not
Right.
So all they have is responsible for the signage.
Come again? The state would be responsible.
The state is responsible. I report a couple times a year on the state of the signs to the American.
Okay. I'm blanking out again. It's after 8 on a long day, so. That's another, not really a county Kuleana then. I mean, the parking lot area and stuff, if that land was acquired by the county, then obviously that portion, yeah. And then the west end of it is state too, yeah, the whole parking lot and everything, yeah. Yeah. So really only the county's Kuleana and this would be the parking lot area, if they were to, because right now it's private owned, yeah? Or do they own that to the state?
I think it's state all the way.
All the way?
Yeah. No, all they have is responsible for the whole thing, including the parking. Okay. And then the last one here was about signage to educate about the past. I think we kind of covered that. So you had one more action, Daniel?
I have a few more. But I was trying, while Tanya's still here, I was trying to think of an action that would address some of the things that she brought up regarding what happens after a site has a preservation plan and how the community can support that. And I'm just wondering, Tanya, if you have any suggestions. I know you had an hour and a half to think of language. But we'd really like to get some language in here that would help support that.
Oh my God, I have no idea.
It doesn't exist yet.
I think, I mean, can you say something like support community-based conservation conservation programs, or develop curriculum around our historic properties, or I'm not sure at this level what kind of requirements or policies can be imposed on individuals, or
how about HOAs in terms of funding, community organizations in terms of funding, monitoring and preservation efforts for historic properties that have preservation plans, something along that line? So I know you're in the trenches, while you're here, you want to really...
So, some of the things that we advocate for, right, on a project by project basis, because I'm not sure how to put it into community policy, but on a project by project basis, some of the recommendations that we make are to create onboarding programs for individuals within, or for prospective homeowners that specifically outline what historic preservation commitments there are within the property, what your kulima as a homeowner is toward that property, toward the people who come to visit that property. So those are some of the recommendations that we make for various projects. I guess my question is, like, and I would love it, how do we implement that on a community basis, and is it possible to implement that on a community basis? And do we have capacity for that? Are there community boards that can be encouraged to provide space for that type of dissemination of information and creation of community groups to help to steward these areas?
So I think right now, I don't think we're going to be able to come up with exact language now, but hearing you share what you're sharing right now will enable us, I think, help us when we come back again, because we're going to revisit this again, to maybe come up with more specific policies and goals that will maybe evolve into a policy or an action based on a need. There is a need, right? And then we're working on stewardship over Wahikupuna and historic property. So your input right now is really valuable. So any more on that?
Yeah, I think what's on the board now is kind of a good start. Thank you for putting thoughts to words and action, by the way. Exploring, creating, and implementing educational onboarding for new residents and homeowners with significant cultural sites, or even significant cultural resources, right? So if you have an area where there's just the beautiful growth of a'ali'i, right? That prior to development, prior to a project going up in that region, folks would maybe go to visit to gather a'ali'i for lei making or something like that, right? And the decision was made to, one, propagate that or protect that a'ali'i, or to plant a'ali'i as a part of their landscaping plan, right? And if a project proponent were open to having open spaces for people to continue that practice of a'ali'i, that is also something that can go into an onboarding program. it would also be nice if we knew safe spaces to gather uhaloa, because uhaloa grows low to the ground and in places sometimes that's not so great, but if we knew where these uhaloa places were, that would be kind of nice. Kind of protected and away from foot traffic and vehicular traffic. That's just a side thing.
I think it's a good starting point. And then we can build on it. But we have some language up there. Would this be an action or a policy?
It's written as a policy that you could assign to the county, but you could put that as a, you could put it as a policy if you'd like to change it slightly and say encourage creating and implementing educational onboarding for new residents. So then that would be on the developer. Whereas this is more something the county would do as a way. So do you want to put it as a policy?
I think putting it as a policy, and then we circle back. We can work on, the action side of it. So, yeah. So I'll make a motion to make this a policy. Thank you, Don.
Second. Second by Everett. Discussion? Any objections? I'm going to adopt the new policy. Encourage creating and implementing educational onboarding for new residents and homeowners with significant cultural sites or resources on their native property. Any additional actions before we leave this section?
Chair, I have more actions, but I could hold off on the actions until we circle back if you want to get into.
I think we should wrap up. So
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so getting back to the action, establish cultural parks, preserves and heritage corridors for visitation and education. That's another one that comes out of the Kihei McKenna Community Plan. So I make a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Everett. Discussion? Any objections? Okay, new policy. Establish cultural parks, preserves, and heritage corridors for visitation and education.
Action or a policy? Action. It's action.
And we had another action?
Yeah, I think I have two more. Implement a cultural overlay map for South Maui region to provide protection for areas of significant archaeological, historical, and cultural resources.
Would that be separate from the county's cultural overlay? Or would it be part of it?
I envision it as being part of it, but the county's doesn't exist right now. I mean, I think it's gone back to committee. So yeah, I do envision it as being like that. What the county will eventually come up with. So that's my motion.
Is there a second?
I second for discussion.
Seconded by Everett. Discussion? Go ahead, Everett.
I like it if it's based upon studies. In other words, as Tanya mentioned, the state has a record of all the AISs, and if there was some way to consolidate the information of those AISs onto a map.
Yep, that's how I see it. Existing studies, just a database of what's already there.
So if we could tweak it to include, Tanya, if you could suggest some language to tweak it to address that issue.
I think that reads well. I would maybe switch up to say, based on existing studies and previously identified historic properties.
Do you accept that amendment? Actually, that was not it.
Yeah, I'm gonna change my motion, amend my motion to include what's written up there on the screen.
I'm amending my second.
Discussion? Any objections? Okay, I'm going to adopt this additional cultural overlay map action.
Just one more regarding, I don't know if this is in my comments regarding establishing is it? So there's actually 2 pages. Oh, there it is. Support the establishment of a cultural center and museum. It could be more than one. In the South Maui region to help steward South Maui's history and tell its story. A community museum can be the caretaker of artifacts, photos, and other documents pertaining to the region. A community cultural center can be a gathering place to help preserve, portray, and share the arts, crafts, language, and traditions of the living Oiwi culture.
Second.
So that's my motion. Thank you, everyone.
Seconded by Everett.
So there are other districts that have cultural centers and museums on the west side, Makawao, Maipuku. But I think there's a need for something like that in South Maui. And I think there will be an opportunity to perhaps find a place for it, some land to do this in the future. I kind of envision more than one. I can see one in Hulakai, I can see one in Honuaula. So yeah, I think there's a need for this.
So with support, it would be more of a policy rather than an action, right?
It's a policy response, okay. That's fine. And then later on, maybe as an action, we can be more specific. Come back to it. Okay, that's my motion. It's been second.
Discussion?
Second.
Seconded by Everett.
The museum can include some of the events that happen here too, like the military, and that can be included in this issue too.
Yeah.
Any objections? We have adopted policy to support the establishment of a cultural center and museum. Any more? Everett?
While we have Tanya here, there are thousands of acres in South Maui owned by the state that I would think would have a lot of archaeological sites. How can we encourage an AIS on state property? Because if you look at cultural resources in terms of trails and pathways to learn about and experiences, how can any suggestions for a policy, or maybe it would be an action to encourage archaeological inventory surveys on state-owned properties in South Maui?
I'm gonna let you know, Selena, maybe I'm probably gonna hear about it from Susan or Andrew, but the state is required to maintain an inventory of all historic properties on their lands. The challenge to being able to maintain the inventory or even find out what's on their lands is funding and capacity, right? And timing. You don't want to go out in certain areas during the rainy season because you're not going to see anything, right? So timing is one aspect, and again, funding and capacity to do that. But the state is required to maintain an inventory of historic properties on their lands.
Are you aware of any AISs on the state property in South Maui?
The only one that I'm aware of for like the extreme southern section was associated with the small munitions cleanup in Akihikina'o Reserve. So that's and the NAR's effort at putting together a cultural resource management plan for the NAR specifically. But as far as the other areas, there are smaller studies done in the Kanaia area early on, I want to say in the 80s, again in support of the Army Reserve training area, right? But usually there's an action associated with the inventory survey. I would say one way to maybe encourage the state to maintain or fulfill the mandate to understand, to maintain the inventory is to, I don't know, encourage the departments to all get together and understand that, and to carry out that kuleana that they have. But again, understanding that funding and staffing are issues.
What if we say, as a policy, encourage the state to fund and complete archaeological inventory surveys on its properties within South Maui?
I would love to do that, but the community plan cannot tell the state what to do, unfortunately. That's something as voters we have to do.
Can we encourage it? We're not requiring it, we're just encouraging.
Okay, encourage as an action item.
So that was a motion.
That's the motion.
And is there a second? Second by Bernie. Discussion. Any objections? I'm going to adopt the additional policy, or this is not really an action, this is a policy, isn't it? And what is the action there? To send a letter?
Maybe we say encourage and lobby for funding to enable the state to carry out.
Is that amendment accepted? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see how that can be harmful. We just helping, I mean, they can help. They're always short-handed.
More discussion? Any objections? I'm going to adopt an additional policy or action? Action, okay. Encourage and lobby for funding for the state to carry out archaeological inventory on state properties in South Maui. Yes, Claire?
There was talk about including the cultural preserves as a list and an action at some point, and it just hasn't been brought up. So I wanted to know if you guys wanted to have that in an action or in a policy.
Do we have that list we can see?
I don't have it with me. It's not in front of me. Oh, it's in your testimony, Rob.
Yeah. Okay. It's on the last page of the policies.
I move to include I think this is actually proposed by Lucy.
Yes.
To include the list of cultural preserves.
Does everyone see that? There are eight preserves named. Is there a second? Second by Daniel.